Hey writer, if you're ready to level up, then buckle up. Get your pen and paper ready. It's time for another episode of the Art and Business of Writing podcast.
Hey guys, welcome back to another edition of the Art and Business of Writing podcast. I am your host, Chris Jones, where today my guest is none other than James Noll. James has worked as a sandwich maker, a yogurt dispenser, a daycare provider, a video store clerk, a daycare provider again, a summer camp counselor, a waiter, a prep cook, a sandwich maker again, a line cook, a security guard, a line cook again, a waiter again, a bartender, a librarian, and a teacher. Somewhere in there, he played drums in a punk rock band, recorded several albums, and has written dozens of short stories and a handful of novels. So without further ado, I want to bring to you guys James Noll. And full disclosure, James Noll, I've known James for several years now because James is also my partner at the Fredericksburg Independent Book Festival. And I brought James on because he's doing some phenomenal things in his writing life that I think you will benefit from. So sit tight. It's deeper in the interview, but you're not going to want to miss it. So without further ado, here's my interview with James Noll. Hey, James, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, how's it going?
Doing well, man. Doing well. How about yourself?
Very well, actually. Enjoying the windy March weather. It's my favorite month. It's my birth month. But yeah, considering everything that we've gone through for the last year, it's really actually nice to have spring again. And I know that sounds trite, but I am not a spring person. I like cold weather. I like holing up in my studio and getting work done. So for me to say that I'm enjoying the spring weather means something.
It's been quite the last 12, 13 months here, I can tell you.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But so expand on the bio a little bit. You talk about being an educator and all these like other jobs you've done. Like, how did all those jobs kind of bring you to where you are now as a writer?
All right, so teaching is my main gig. It's what pays the bills. It pays the mortgage, gives me health insurance. Absolutely. And I don't think I would have been confident enough to start doing all of this extra publishing and writing had I not taught. I was writing well before I started teaching, but it wasn't really good. And this is writing fiction. I wasn't writing nonfiction or articles or journalism or anything. And the desire to be an author was always there ever since I was a little kid. But it wasn't until probably around 2013 is when I really started seeing the benefits of delving that deeply into my subject be reflected in the writing that I was doing, to the point where I thought, I think I feel confident enough now that I want to publish this. And then, of course, around that time they were about 3 to 5 years into the self-publishing revolution. And I'd already tried going the traditional route of getting an agent and trying to get traditionally published, and with no success. And so those things kind of coalesced into going the self-publishing route and doing it on my own, which, coming from a background of playing music and I played punk rock drums for years, it was always weird to me that more authors didn't publish themselves, but there was that huge stigma on it about vanity publishing where it was just frowned upon with literature. But all of my artist friends did their own art, had their own art shows. All of my photography friends did the same thing. All of my musician friends, we would be laughed at if we showed up at a gig without our own product to sell that we did ourselves. And self-publishing was the last domino to fall for that. So it really did start with, like I said, as a kid, always wanting to do it, loving reading, loving stories. And then it was because of teaching that I got into doing my own fiction. And then it took off from there.
So talk about your influences. You talked about like writing as a kid or like, being into writing as a kid and wanting to be an author. Who influenced you?
I still remember the moment when reading clicked for me. My mom, read to me as a child, and I was reading Dr. Seuss. And not that Dr. Seuss was a huge influence, but I grabbed a whole bunch of books and went down to my parents. They were watching Merv Griffin. There's an old sentence. I just broke out the books and I started reading to them out loud. But in terms of wanting to write, I really enjoyed Stephen King novels when I was in high school. I remember driving to the mall, another old statement right there, to pick up a book from the bookstore. It was his latest book in the Gunslinger series. And being that into reading as a boy. This is 11th grade for me, which is not the norm. Most of the boys that I teach are not into reading fiction. And I enjoyed that series so much, and Lord of the Rings and just all that other stuff. But I remember there was a series of paperbacks that came out in the 60s, and we had them lying around the house. Obviously, my parents and my brother were big readers themselves. And it was called The World's Best Science Fiction, insert year. And this one, I think, was 1964 or 1966. And it was a short story called Repent, Harlequin Said the TikTok Man. And whatever the case, I remember reading that. I was just dazzled by that story. Did I mention that was Harlan Ellison? I think I did. After reading that for the billionth time, I was sitting in bed and I remember thinking, I could probably write something like this. And I knew it wasn't going to be good and I didn't care. I just wanted to do it. So I went downstairs to my family's Commodore Amiga, which again, I know I'm dating myself, and I tapped out a story, showed it to my girlfriend at the time in 11th grade. And her response was appropriate. It was, it's good. You should keep on trying. And from that moment on, I was hooked. And again, it was a confluence of all these different things, but I still remember specifically thinking to myself, I could write a story if I wanted to. I don't have to ask permission. Nobody's going to hire me to do this. I don't care. And I'm sure a lot of artists feel the same way. I'm going to pick up this instrument and start playing. I want to paint something. And it just clicked. And from there, it was nonstop. I wrote through college. I wrote post-college. And of course, I'm writing now.
Dude, that's a great story. I can remember being in 11th grade and all I wanted to read were love notes from girls. I promise.
Well, me too. Maybe I got a few, maybe I didn't, but that wasn't my prime reading material. I wanted to read love notes from Stephen King.
Right. Oh, that's awesome. What I think is cool, though, is that you talk about that, like writers, and the writers came late to the game of self-publishing. And I think that that's so true. I mean, like you talk about how artists do art and musicians made music. And it wasn't frowned upon. It wasn't looked down upon that you created your own art and you had your own art shows in a gallery, or you hung them in places, or like you said, you played your own music from a stage, but then trying to self-publish a book, all of a sudden it's a completely different and foreign world. And people look kind of down their nose on that.
Mm-hmm.
So like once that whole self-publishing thing tipped, what happened to you as a writer?
I learned a lot about what I was doing wrong, but I didn't let it stop me. There's a famous quote from Michael Jordan about how many different times he failed. He got cut from his high school basketball team and kept on trying and missed, thousands of free throws and all those things. It's actually on a poster outside of my classroom across the hall. Co-teacher has it up, so I see it every day. But I made as many mistakes as somebody can make. And I didn't let it stop me. I didn't really care that I was making mistakes, and I still don't. And maybe that's a maturity thing. Maybe that's would have stopped me when I was in high school from doing something. But maybe because, I've raised children, I've made billions of mistakes and I'm still here. I don't care. And I look at it as a learning opportunity. And it was very important to me to just get it done. Just hearkening back to what we were just talking about, it never made sense to me that writers were frowned upon for self-publishing because of the world that I came from. It also still doesn't make sense to me, although I get it, I guess. It feels like maybe it's just the different medium, but when we were recording our own music, it wasn't expected that it was this super pro product that we produced in a multi-million-dollar studio. Eventually we got to the point where we were recording in pretty good studios, either on our dime or somebody else's. But the first album that I ever recorded was recorded in the basement of my friend's house. And that's the one that people love the most. And so when it comes to writing, I think there's a bit of perfectionism and people expect it to be of a level that might not be possible for some indie writers. And again, I think that might be the medium. And it's just an interesting little side note. But the mistakes that I made, I think, the first one, the cover, and I know you've given a talk about covers before. I've made, 50 to 60 covers that were just horrible. And I'm just learning now how to get, out of that particular thing. But the first book that I read, to get back on track, the first book that I read was about marketing. And that's really where I realized I had no knowledge of marketing. I could write, I felt pretty well, but I needed to get better at selling it. And I needed to get over that imposter syndrome. I needed to, I knew that nobody was asking me to do this, but I still wanted to do it. And it was a book called Tim Grawl and I think it's called Your First 10,000 Readers or Your First 10,000 Copies. It's one of those two. When he wanted to write a book, he said the first thing that he did was he signed up for a whole bunch of conventions, Comic-Cons or writing conventions or wherever it is that he could bring his book, because what he wanted to do was build an email list. And so really that, if to really focus on the question that you're asking, that's where I started. And I already had a trilogy done instead of just one book, which is something that a lot of book marketing experts advocate for, is to make sure that you don't just go to market with one book if you're going to do these events. And so I felt pretty confident that I could go and sell these three things. It looked better having a table that had all of these three different covers. But I also had a whole bunch of short stories that I had paid somebody to illustrate a while before. So I had an alternate selling point. So if you didn't want to buy one of my novels, you could buy the short stories that were illustrated for a cheaper price. I sold them for $8, I think. And so that was a really nice array to have sitting on my table instead of just, 50 copies of one book. That's really the first step that I took after publishing these things.
Now, you talked about like making mistakes on the cover and just kind of going through the whole process of learning. So what was the learning curve then when you first started off? And then how did you overcome a lot of the challenges to become very fluid and fluent in just producing your own books? I know a lot of authors are very timid and very afraid to deal with, KDP, the create space environment, and they kind of panic and don't know what to do. But walk me through that. Walk me through that kind of the learning curve from the first time you published to being very comfortable publishing now.
I mean, it really is, like I said, it's about trying again and again. And KDP at the time was CreateSpace. Amazon owned them still, but they were two separate entities. Now it's KDP. It's the same idea. The technical stuff never bothered me, but it bothers a lot of people. And when I say technical stuff, it's the formatting and making sure that the book looks the way that it's supposed to look. It's stuff that I didn't know anything about. I didn't know at the time what widow and orphan lines were. I didn't know at the time what a drop cap was. I didn't know how to format my book so that the left page was slightly skewed to the left and the right page was slightly skewed to the right. I didn't know that chapters all start on the right-hand side, and if there's no words on the left-hand side, that's okay. Just little stuff like that that's about the reader experience. And I made several mistakes that way, just not formatting my book correctly. And fortunately, CreateSpace and now KDP allows you to upload your book multiple times without worrying about having to pay again. And that was also very necessary. So I screwed those up and I lost some money. I spent money on copies that I sold to people and then realized, oh crap, this book doesn't look the way it's supposed to look. And I've got to do it again. From there, moving up to trying to have some sort of consistency with my covers, making sure that if this is a trilogy, all the covers need to look the same. Again, coming from the punk rock world, I guess that's where it hurt me a little bit, because you could have a weird picture on a punk rock album that's slightly ironic or tongue-in-cheek, and everybody's going to be like, oh, that's great. But books don't work that way. Readers have specific expectations for, the horror cover that you have. It can't just be something that you want to put up there. It has to be really well produced. And learning how to use Photoshop, learning how to use InDesign, and watching hundreds of YouTube tutorials whenever I couldn't get something to look the way that I wanted it to, and not giving up, just keep on trying. And it wasn't like I felt like I was failing again and again. It felt like I was learning more, and allowing myself to make those mistakes helped me learn more and not letting it bother me. Just keep on going back into it and trying again. And that's just with the book formatting. There are also plenty of cons that I went to that I'll never go to again because they weren't worth the time, they weren't worth the drive, or I was the wrong fit for that particular con. And learning how to hit the right places if I'm going to continue to sell books live, and just always being willing to pivot and learn from whatever it is, be it good or bad, so that I can make it better the next iteration.
And that's great. And I think what I like about what you're sharing, what you're explaining, is that one, it just takes audacity to be a creative. Like you can't being an author isn't for the timid. It's not for the weak. It's for the people who say, okay, look, this is who I am. This is what I want to become. This is what my mind is set upon being. I'm going to be bold about it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to make the mistakes. Like you said, it costs money. Sometimes mistakes can be costly. I've spent money, on web design, or I spent money on other things in the past. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's bleeding my pocket,
Yeah.
but you learn the lesson and you keep going because you're invested, And so I think hearing that in your story, just that you're so invested in yourself that the mistakes don't hurt you, the cost doesn't deter you, whether cons work out or not. Because I know that sometimes for authors, if they don't go to a con and in their mind sell out all their books and make a bunch of money, it's deemed a failure. But like you talked about, you go to make contacts, you go to network, you go to build an email list. So all those things that people don't typically think about when it comes to producing and marketing a book they're so important for the longevity of the author, because sales isn't a dirty word, but we kind of make it that way. But but you can't just put a book on Amazon and just say, hey, my book's on Amazon, and expect something to happen.
No. What you just said reminded me of, there's one up in DC. It's a Comic-Con. It's called Awesome Con. And the last one before the pandemic was actually my best selling time there. I didn't just make my table. I made, enough to cover the weekend, which for selling books, that's good. Usually I'm going at a loss or I'm just breaking even. But a lot of the people who were there, they weren't all selling books. They're selling other stuff. They're selling stuff that when you go to these Comic-Cons and 50,000 people come through, they're looking for Harry Potter wands or bobblehead toys or whatever it is that you're selling, T-shirts, all that stuff. Apparently it was a bad sales weekend and they were all kvetching about it. And they had a right to. They were upset about placement, or they were upset about some other aspect of the way it was marketed or whatever. And they spent a lot of money and they didn't make the money back. And what I was thinking the whole time was, yeah, I would have been pissed too, but I would have tried to do something different to make it worth my time. At that point, maybe you pivot to start handing out freebies. With authors, that's easy. You can create a postcard with a QR code on it saying, hey, you want a free book? It's a digital download. Here you go. And you start handing stuff out for free. And it's a bitter pill to swallow for some people, because if you spend as low as $350 like I did on a booth, or as high as $1,500 on a booth, you might realize that weekend's not going to be a sales weekend. But then you have to think of it in terms of marketing. And maybe that weekend wasn't just for you to make money. Maybe that weekend was for you to advertise, essentially, and hope that you get people coming back on the back end. And it's a learning experience, and you have to try not to take it personally or get too upset. And that's really hard to do when money's involved, especially for a lot of people who have these small entrepreneurial businesses. And it's important to look at things that way so that you don't get burned out. And I got burned out. I think I told you earlier that before the pandemic hit, I didn't want to go to cons anymore. I'd spent 3 years. One year I went to 25 different cons, and I was working full time. Almost every weekend I was hitting these cons, trying to build my email list. And I just didn't want to do that anymore. I wanted to pivot. I wanted to do something else. And that's when I decided to adapt one of my stories into a movie and I ended up spending the pandemic year on that instead. But that's okay too. You're allowed to take breaks from whatever it is that you're doing, especially if you're heading in one direction and you're either burned out or it isn't working as well as you thought it would. You can try to do something else. And that's what being an entrepreneur is about, is figuring out what works and what doesn't, and focusing on the stuff that works and, shuttling away the stuff that doesn't.
And you've said a couple things that I really loved. And that last statement was so perfect, though. That's what being an entrepreneur is about. Because I think that as authors, we have to see ourselves as entrepreneurs. We're not just writers. Like we're writers to an extent. We're writers to an extent that we put that word "the end." And once you put the word "the end" on there, the role flips. Mm-hmm. Now I go from being an author to now I'm a publisher. I got to think and act like a publisher. And then once I've got that book in my hand, now I've got to think and act like a book salesperson. I got to think, how do I get this book into people's hands? How do I sell copies? How do I get people to want what I've produced?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And it's difficult for artists to do, for some, especially writers. It's very easy to romanticize the creative process. And I was definitely guilty of it early on, but you said this to me at some point, once it's done, it's now a business. Once it's done, I don't care about necessarily, the creative process. Now I've got to sell this stuff. And I still see that a lot in some of the forums that I go to, people talking about, oh, I love this character. And they're just wrapped up in the world of creativity and they feel special. And that's awesome. I'm not putting that down. It does feel awesome. But at a certain point, you have to get beyond that because you are creating a product that you want to sell to other people. It reminds me a lot of the movie industry. I'm talking to my friend Chip now. We're adapting a script and we've got the story done. It's great. But now he went through it again. He said, look, we've got a $5 million movie here, and that's too much for what we're trying to do. We need to do this, this, and this to make it $1 million movie. And let's go back in and figure out all these details because we're not going to get anybody to finance this because it's a business and we're going to have to do it this way. And, 20 years ago, I've been like, oh, that's no way. I'm not doing that. The story is the story. But after the last 10 to 15 years of trying to do this, it's like, yeah, no, I totally get it. What do we need to do to try to make this thing, an actual viable product?
Right. Now, I want to segue into that. First, I want to kind of dive into your niche and let the readers know what your niche is, because you're in a segment of a popular niche. Talk about that a little bit.
You're talking about the horror and dark fantasy and thriller and stuff like that?
Right, right.
Yeah, it sells. When I actually started thinking about adapting one of my short stories into a short film, I did some professional services, some consultations with Sarah Elizabeth. She does Life Out Loud films here in Virginia. And I told her what my genre is. She goes, horror sells. Horror sells left and right. It's cheap to produce and it makes a lot of money. And that is something that when I first started publishing, I was a little worried about. Oh my God, I'm an English teacher. What if my admin finds out I'm writing this stuff? It's horror stories. And then I quickly realized that there are a lot of people like me out there because there are a lot of people who love horror and post-apocalyptic and science fiction or the mashup and thrillers and all that stuff. And they are, I'm not going to say they're rabid fans, but it's what they like to read. And I've met dozens of them, close to 100 of them, over the course of those couple of years doing the con circuit. And I, because I went back several years in a row and I'd see them again, and I made fans that way. And it was always nice to see them again. Like, oh, hey, how you doing? Like, you got a new book? Like, yeah. And then we talk about our favorite shows. And it's definitely something that if you are inclined to writing, translates across multiple mediums as well. But it's just really popular. And it's, for me, fun to write.
So let's talk about that process of turning your book into a film adaptation. How do you start with the viability of it? Like, how do you look at it and say, okay, will this translate well? Will it work? Can I make a script out of it? Like, what's the jump off point?
It really is about money. In doing the consultation with Sarah Elizabeth and just knowing what I knew myself and talking to my friend Chip, who's the screenwriter that I'm working with, my initial idea was to create an anthology series like Black Mirror or The Twilight Zone, or now there's a show on HBO Max called Them, because I just love those. I mean, not everybody, lots of people who like horror and thrillers and sci-fi love those types of shows. Oh, was it Fringe? Do you remember Fringe from the early aughts?
No, I don't.
Okay. It was a sci-fi time alternate reality show, and I just loved it. And I thought, okay, I'd love to do something like this. So let me look at because I'm going to be dealing with, they call this no budget, what I did. I ended up spending close to $12,000, $15,000 on a 10-minute or 15-minute short movie. That's called no budget, which blows people's minds. A micro budget is $1 million.
Wow.
A micro budget movie is $1 million. A low budget indie film is somewhere between $3 to $5 million. And then you start getting into studio produced movies that are up in the 10, 20, $30 million range. So I looked at the short stories that I had that I liked. The one that I really wanted to do, it was set in the past, I'd say 19th century, in the mountains of what is now the Czech Republic, and multiple characters and sets, and it just was not going to be viable for to pay $50,000 to create this short. I just was not going to be able to raise that money. So I looked for the ones that had one or two settings, one or two characters, and still would create the sense of two things for me, because I like to infuse my writing with a little bit of humor, because humor and horror work well together, and also had the weird, creepy aspect to it. And that's when I settled on a story that I'd written called Prey, Prey, because it had, in the short story, it had one setting. I actually expanded it to have two, and that actually added a day of shooting and money to it. But it only had two characters. And the spend was going to be a whole lot less. The amount that I had to raise was going to be a whole lot less than any of the other ones. And so that was the first thing that I thought. And then I adapted it to a script, and I to make it more viable for modern audiences. The original short story had an old man and a young male reporter. I turned that into an old woman and a young female reporter. because in Hollywood, everything is about representation now. And I also felt that it would be creepier to have this old woman be the bad character, considering what I don't want to give away the ending, considering what happens. And it made the story a whole lot more interesting. I made some changes in the script that weren't there in the short story that made the story better. But it did come from a place of like, well, this is what sells now. And I hate to make it sound like predatory like that, but that's totally what you have to think about. So let's do it that way. And then I was lucky enough to get Elizabeth White, who's an indie director from LA. I reached her through a website. I can't remember the name of the website right now. I'll look it up later. And she liked the script and she agreed to fly out and do it. And so that's kind of how the ball got rolling, just in terms of deciding to do it and adapting it and making it something that audiences might want to see.
Wow, that's phenomenal, dude. Like just the fact that you, like, again, we talk about Audacity earlier, just have the audacity just to go from, okay, I'm gonna make a movie out of one of my short stories. It's because it's one of those things where you think, well, how do I do that? Because we all sit around, we binge watch Netflix or Hulu,
Right.
or whatever the case may be, and think, oh man, I should put my own stuff up there. How does that happen? How do I do that? And then you just go and you just do it.
Yeah, again, my wife thought I was crazy too, but she definitely supported. It was a very intense weekend getting that shoot done. We needed at least 2 more days that I didn't have the money for, but it came from wanting to do this on my own. And you just have to have, I guess, I don't want to say the guts. You called it audacity. I just wanted to do it. And if you want to do something, then you should do it. You should try not to let anything get in your way. And I don't know if you've talked to other people about the imposter syndrome, but I lost that a long time ago. And it did come from that punk rock attitude of, well, why not? I want to do this. Every business person in the world decided to open a business because they wanted to open a business. And if this is a business as well as a creative entity, there's no reason why I can't do this as well. I don't know if it comes from privilege or background, or I have no idea. I just wanted to, and then I figured out a way to get it done.
I think it's some of that Gen X in you too.
Probably. What does that mean, though? What do you mean by that?
that whole thing where we always grab the bull by the horns, like, okay, well, if it needs to get done, we're just going to do it.
Yeah.
I'm not going to wait.
No, it's true.
I'm not going to wait for someone to give me permission to do something. I'm just going to do whatever I want to do.
That's true. That's definitely a hallmark of our generation. It's the screw you guys, I'm getting this done aspect of it. Right. Yeah, absolutely. The cool thing is about the movie is, I had the one design. It was going to be the first entry in this anthology. Now it's turned it more into, well, here's an example of how you can start in one direction and it ends up in a completely opposite but better direction. The anthology idea is still there and I still want to do it. But from all of the consultations that I've done and talking to Elizabeth and then my friend Chip, now what's happening is Elizabeth wants to put this into film festivals, because then you get those laurels, right? And you get a credit. Hey, this film won this award at this festival for sound, which is because of my background. I got to do the sound on this. I cleaned up the dialogue and I did all the music for it, which was a lot of fun. Or for script, or for the DP, for the photography, whatever it is. And you use that as a way to get investors for the larger project. And Chip and I went ahead and wrote a script based off of this short, expanded the world, turned it into this huge, 90-minute horror feature that we're still working on. We're trying to tighten and control it a little bit. And now Elizabeth's looking at she's got a couple of indie investors who might fund it. And she and Peter, the director of photography, they want to come back out to Virginia and set up and film here for a couple of months and really take advantage of the lack of a film office here. There's a Virginia film office, but in Fredericksburg, there's no taxes. There's no permits that you have to go through. And California is crazy for all of that, as well as just the amazing green forest that is out here and that the story focuses on. It's set out in a farm in Spotsy. But that was not my initial intent. My initial intent was, I want to have something cool that I can sell at these cons that I go to and that I can use for marketing. And now it's turned into something where it could be a feature. And I'm working with Hollywood screenwriters and indie directors. And I'm talking to them tonight. We're trying to put a stamp on the short so that we can start finalizing it and putting the finishing touches on it and send it out to these festivals that hopefully will come up again later on in the year. And you just kind of roll with that, Maybe I'll get back to the anthology. Maybe I won't. Maybe this thing will end up not being very good. Maybe it will. But it doesn't mean I'm not going to do it.
I love that. I just love that attitude, man. So what I want you to do next is I want you to break down the process as if you're telling a 5-year-old how to produce a film from a book. So I want you
Oof.
to I know it's a task, but I mean, because it sounds like if I'm a listener, it's like, man, what an intimidating thing. How do I do it? Where do I start? Where do I
Yeah.
go? So just breaking it down step by step, like, okay, what did you do, James, to go from here's my short story to here's my short film?
The first thing I had to do is consider cost, and I had to make sure that I had something that I could afford to build the money for. And what that means in terms of a short film, we're not talking about a feature, we're talking about a short film, is the less actors, the better, and the less sets, the better. I probably could have saved a lot of money if I didn't add the car scene to this. The initial draft of the adaptation had 4 scenes in it, and I let my friend Chip read it, and he said, cut it down to 2. And so I did, and that saved me probably about $10,000. After that, it was a matter of making sure the script and the dialogue pops. That was another consideration that I had to think of too. The script, because all of your description is up to the director and the director of photography. Really, what you're writing is a blueprint for them to use to create something. And so I had to take all of my awesome analogies, right, and my metaphors and the beauty of the language and that I was writing in the short story and boil it down to dialogue and make sure that I had at least 10 pages of dialogue that could be turned into a 10 to 15 minute script. And that dialogue, that every last word, very much like poetry, mattered. And if you don't do that, you're going to end up with a really boring movie. I also had to consider the fact that there are 3 different scenes. And so each scene I was trying to make approximately 3 to 3.5 minutes long. So with screenwriting, that's a page is about a minute of screen time, depending on what you're doing. And that's a really long scene. When you think about what we watch scenes that are between 30 seconds to 1 minute long. The reason I was willing to do that was because I figured this is an indie project, and what we were going for was proof of concept. And even from there, I tried to cut down the scenes to 2 minutes. And that takes a lot. You're cutting out information. I also had to make sure that I wasn't just having the characters relate expository information, which nobody wants to read, which fortunately I'd already had the short story, so that a lot of that was already in place. Once the script was done, I did a couple of consults, again, with Sarah Elizabeth from Life Out Loud Films. She directed me towards this website to look for directors. That's where I hooked up with Elizabeth. I contacted the Virginia Film Office because I needed to get my crew. I needed a gaffer and a grip. I needed a sound guy. Elizabeth was my director. She came with the director of photography, Peter Lugo. I needed a focus puller, an assistant photography. Shoot, what is it? It's not an AD. It's assistant camera. Yeah, AC, assistant cameraman. I needed that. I needed an assistant director. I needed other just people that could come around and pick things up and move things. I needed to get the actors. I needed to get all that done. And when Elizabeth expressed interest in doing it, and we worked out how much this was going to cost, we decided that I told her, I was like, this is my first time doing this. I really don't know what I'm doing, so I'm going to rely on you a lot. So let's move forward. She was totally willing to do it. It was the most generous thing I've ever heard in my life. She could have easily been like, all right, no, you don't know what you're doing. Never mind. I don't want to work with you. But she liked the project enough and believed in the project enough that she wanted to complete it. So she called in some favors from people, and she got Sally Kirkland, who is an 80s movie Hollywood icon. She's now older. She's in her 70s, to agree to fly out in the middle of a pandemic to do this short film. And then a casting director that she knows in Hollywood got Shalom DeSoto, who played the young lady in the short, and she flew out as well. And so once I got all of that established and I knew what everybody needed in terms of pay for these 2 days, then I had to raise the money. I already had $2,000 saved up just in my business account. I got another $2,000 from a grant from Fredericksburg, from the city. They have an FAC grant. And I wanted to get another $11,000. So I ran a Indiegogo and got $1,000 from that. And then I ended up doing what everybody tells you not to do. I financed the rest on my own. So I was able to raise the money that I needed to do. Then I had to buy tickets, like plane tickets for everybody, hotels for the people who were coming in from out of town. And then there was a whole bunch of stages of prep in between. The weekend itself of shooting, I could do another half hour on that, but I'll spare you the details with that. But that was basically getting up to the point where I was getting everybody online in Virginia, in Fredericksburg, to make the actual movie.
That's quite the process.
I know. I'm sorry, that's not for a 5-year-old.
No, but it was simple enough for the audience to grasp every step from start to finish.
I hope so. And it's still not over.
Oh man, still so much more to do. But no, but I think it's cool that you did that. I think it's cool that you wanted to try it, and I think it's cool that you executed on it. And
Thank you.
I can't wait to see the end product.
Yeah, I hope it's good after all of this. I've got my nose so far in it because I did the sound, and I know the story. And I've talked to my wife a couple of times about it. She was like, "Yeah, there's a couple aspects that I was like, I know. I don't even want to think about that right now."
Your wife is so honest.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, I told my friend Tim, I was like, this could end up being the worst mistake I ever made, but it goes back to I don't care, I did it. Now I know how to do this better. I'll do it better next time.
Right. Oh, see, and I like that. There will be a next time, right? You're gonna do it again?
Of course. Oh yeah. I told the guy I was renting the cameras from, because we had to rent some really expensive cameras. It was a $3,000 rental for the camera and the lights and all the other stuff that came along with it. The camera itself cost like $100,000. And I returned, it was up in DC Camera, and when I returned to him, he's like, how'd the weekend go? I was like, I am totally exhausted. I'm so glad it's over, and I can't wait to do it again. It's that addicting, But yeah, so there will be a next time, hopefully with even more professional crew. I love my crew this time, and they're definitely going to come back for the next one. But we were on a skeleton crew. So getting even more professional crew, getting even more funding for the next one, I can't wait to go through that process.
No, that's exciting. It's such a cool thing that you did it. So as far as encouraging other authors to pursue it, which sort of authors do you think best fit this model that you did? Do you think it's best suited for fiction authors since it's short, or do you think a nonfiction author can take advantage of this? Like, who would you recommend?
Oh, nonfiction, absolutely. Documentaries are so much cheaper. You can do what I did at a much more no budget level because you have a lot of time. You don't have to deal with actors, So I would absolutely, if you're doing any sort of documentary stuff, you could do it. If you're turning something nonfiction into fiction, then that's a little bit different. But I would say anybody who has the drive to do it should give it a shot. Study it, research it, figure out what you're willing to do, what you're not willing to do. There's no reason to not do it. It's your material, it's your IP. The benefits far outweigh the negatives, because if it works out and you end up with something that's a product that lots and lots of people love, well, there you go. Great. You kind of launched yourself into that direction. If you end up with something that you're like, I'm not sure if this works, well, then you've figured out a way to not do it the second time and to grow again. But this goes back to the idea I had for this was much larger than what I'm ending up doing right now. But what I've always wanted to do is what Netflix does. This is based on some of my research I did with Netflix. Netflix drills into different countries and figures out what sells in those countries. And I don't know if you've noticed this, if you watch a lot of Netflix, but in the pandemic, because a lot of production was shut down, a whole bunch of German productions started showing up on my timeline and my algorithm, and French productions, because there were plenty of horror, French horror movies, German horror movies, Russian horror movies, fantasy, sci-fi, all that stuff that I love that hadn't showed up on Netflix yet. Well, that's because Netflix, in order to continue their subscription model, has to constantly get more subscribers. And so what they do is they go to these different countries and they create content based on what sells in those countries. And I thought that is just brilliant. So they're not just working in America. They're not just based here. They're going everywhere. And not only is that inclusive and multicultural, but it's just a smart way to run a business. And I thought, wow, we could even go even more microcosmic than that. If we were able to get to take advantage of the writers, let's say we'll start with Fredericksburg, and we could have a channel that does all of the romance stories from romance writers in Fredericksburg, horror writers, science fiction writers, nonfiction, and turn them into entertainment. Then we could also do another part of the Fredericksburg station that does documentaries, half-hour long documentaries, 45-minute long, whatever it is, about things that are specific to Fredericksburg. And then if you think about that, you could do that in every small town that has an artistic population, in every state and in every country in the world, and drill down that microcosmically. Because one of the things that people love is fiction set in their hometown, or documentaries and news programs or infotainment about stuff that goes on in their world. So that's like the larger picture thing that I would love to do. I'm not sure if I'll ever be able to do it, but that's where a lot of this comes from.
That sounds like a lot of fun too.
Yeah. And again, like, see, like, well, what would I say to somebody who wants to do something like I did? Do it. Figure it out. Read up all about it. We got YouTube. YouTube has tons of videos now. You can go learn from people who have done this. You can contact me, pick my brain. I'll tell you, find local creative people, directors. They're all over the place, and ask them how to do it. Tap into your local artistic community. And you don't have to spend the amount of money that I did to do this. I just chose to do it that way because I wanted to look really good. So I spent a lot of money on the camera and on the actors. But there are plenty of people who've done perfectly legitimate projects on things like iPhones or DSLR cameras. It's not always necessarily about spending that much money. It's about getting the stuff done and the talent that you have behind it. So there's just so many different ways to be creative and have fun with it. You might as well.
Right on, man. I love it. So, James, how can our audience reach you if they want to contact you to learn more?
My website is jamesnoll.net. That's JAMESNOLL.net. And also, I'm doing a rebrand to encapsulate all the stuff that you and I were just talking about. And so the new storefront is called Silver Hammer Studios. A little callback to the Beatles and a little horror stuff in there as well. And the website for that, we're building it right now, but when it's up, it'll be silverhammer.studio. Those are the two best ways you can contact me.
Awesome, James. And any last second advice, any last minute advice you want to drop off on the audience before we sign off?
Just to repeat, just do it. I know that's a Nike commercial, but it's true. If you want to do something, do it. Learn from your mistakes, capitalize on your successes, and keep on pushing forward.
Awesome. Guys, you've been with the great James Noll and Chris Jones, and hopefully you enjoyed the episode, got something out of it. Be sure to contact James if you want to learn more, and the show notes will be on the website, so you'll get the full picture of how to turn your products, your writing products, and your short stories into film. Thank you very much, and we will see you on the next episode.
Awesome, man. Thanks.
How's that for inspiring? I hope you take action on one thing you learned in today's episode. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast and left a review on iTunes, I want to encourage you to do that too. Finally, be sure to visit chrisjonesinc.com to sign up for updates. Don't worry, I won't spam you. And we'll see you back here next week for another episode.